Welcome to Here Where You Belong, your go-to podcast for exploring belonging with your host and belonging expert, Dea Irby. We are thrilled to have you join us. Together, we'll dive into the depths of what it means for each of us to find our own place in the world, whether it's within our communities, our relationships, or within ourselves. Today's episode is meant to inspire, uplift, and remind you that no matter where you are or where you're headed, you have a place where you truly belong. So grab a cozy spot and settle in. Welcome to Here Where You Belong.
Hello, awesome belongers. Welcome home to Here Where You Belong podcast. Today's guest has built churches and coffee houses and has always included belonging and inclusion and community building in every space that he's worked. And I am so glad to welcome, I'm Dea, your host. Get ready to be inspired and blessed. Help me welcome our guest today, the Reverend Ryan Wiksell. Is that right?
That is, yeah, Dea, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
So glad you're here, Ryan. Well, let me tell you guys a little more about Ryan. He is an Episcopal priest, a church planter, author, and community builder who has spent his life creating spaces for those who often feel like they're on the outside looking in. He, from planning a non-traditional coffeehouse church to serving in parish ministry today, Ryan's heart has always been about connection, inclusion, and helping other people find their place. He's also the co-author, the other author is his dad, of the Last Seder of James, a compelling blend of historical storytelling and biblical insight that explores the deep connection between Passover and the Christian faith. Can't wait to get into that. Ryan, any additions, subtractions, or corrections from that introduction?
I think I'm blushing, actually. That feels that feels like a wonderful introduction. Thank you so much.
Well, you totally deserve that. As you know, this podcast is all about belonging, and I invite people on to tell either their story about how they found belonging or how they create belonging or provide belonging for other people. And Ryan, the mic is yours. Tell us your belonging story or stories, whatever. Go for it.
Thank you again, Dea. This is so close to my heart, and we had some wonderful conversation here leading up to this about how I feel like it's been a theme of my calling, of my vocation, of my ministry. Is we as Christians don't own the gospel. We as a church don't own God, right? You can go to the next church down the street, to the next Christian that you know, and they can tell you about God too. But what we do own is ourselves that we offer to people who come and the people we encounter. Nobody else can offer me but me. In our church, nobody else can offer the relationship of us but us. And so belonging is the one unique thing that we have to give. And I think those churches and those spiritual communities that are thriving and growing right now are the ones that get that, the ones that get that relationship is the point. And that is the one thing that we have to give, and the unique thing we have to offer is community. And it's so I can't think of a more important topic to base an entire podcast off of, because loneliness is such an epidemic, disconnection is such an epidemic. The devices that we've been peddled under the guise of connection with the world, now you can be connected with anyone around the world, and have also been, I think, a means of our destruction, a means of our alienation and disorientation. And we're seeing the mental illness that's resulted from that. We're seeing the physical illness that's resulting from that. And people becoming more and more isolated in their own little silos as a result of largely technology, but also just societal norms and the way that they have been disintegrating. So to talk about belonging, there is literally no more important topic than that. And so I have it on several, it's something that I interface with on several fronts in my life, and your introduction was beautiful for that. One that you don't hear as much about, though, is something that our very Christian faith is rooted in, the foundation of Jews and Gentiles together.
Mhm.
And just very briefly, I'll mention how the first 100 years of our faith um, were mostly Jewish. And Gentiles like myself and like my dad, who wrote the book together, we were the ones on the outside looking in. We were we were sidelined, we were marginalized, and it was incredible to imagine that Gentiles might be included in following a Jewish Messiah. That didn't even make sense to people. And so I have this theory that as we read the New Testament, there is a subtext for almost every verse in the New Testament that where the authors are trying to address this question of, is this a Jewish church? Is this a Gentile church? Or is it both? And what would that mean? I think it was the main thing that every church planter, every church leader was facing in the first century. And so with
Mhm.
our writing work that my father and I have done, and with the Last Seder of James, which is part of the Passover trilogy, and we're working on getting books 2 and 3 out there, um, we really want to take a closer look at what that belonging means as Gentiles were grafted into the olive tree of Judaism in that first century and following. Um, so really, our entire Christian faith is rooted in that question of who belongs. And that's never stopped, that's never ended. Um, if anything, we've forgotten the centrality of that question. But then there's people like you to bring that back, and I'm so thankful to be part of this conversation.
Well, thank you. It is my pleasure. Now, we previously had a bit of a conversation about providing belonging when you were planning a church in a coffee house, that you had a certain approach that was maybe different than most people do, and how you were creating belonging for the people you were trying to attract. Do you want to talk about that some?
Sure. Yeah. And a lot of it comes from just asking a different question. I think rather than asking, well, uh, how can we adjust our church experience so that more people will want to come? Instead, asking ourselves who's being left out. And I want to give a really quick illustration for this because I just love this illustration. But back in World War II, there was an office in the military of trying to design and redesign their planes to survive the front better. And so they were taking these planes that had been shot at and came back and looking at where those bullet holes were in the plane's hull and in the wings and the tail, and saying, well, we need to reinforce these places where we see the bullet holes. And then one very smart engineer, who I think just happened to be Jewish, naturally, uh, said, no, you got it backwards. Don't reinforce the places with bullet holes. Reinforce the places that don't have bullet holes, because those are the places where planes were shot and didn't come back. The
Oh,
places of the planes that returned,
that'll preach.
right? Of the planes that returned, the places that they were shot were survivable and they
Yes.
returned. The places when they're shot in other places, those planes didn't return and we don't have them to look at. And I think that's been a really important line of thinking when it comes to belonging, when it comes to church planning, is with our church in downtown Springfield, Missouri, college town, trying to reach out to college students, artists, unhoused people, a socioeconomically diverse group of people, and those who were just the church dropouts.
Hmm.
You don't ask churchgoers what they want different because they're not there anymore. They're not there to ask. You have to look at the gaps to find who it is that's on the outside. You have to ask the planes that are at the bottom of the ocean, which you can't do. So you have to read between the lines and say, you know what, this is something that we have not tried. And maybe if we try having a coffee house instead of a church building, if we try putting it right in the middle, in between the bars and the galleries and the restaurants and the night spots, and we're open on Wednesday evening, Thursday evening, Friday evening, Saturday evening. If we have events that are not religious or not spiritual, if we put art on the walls that isn't just the art that we like or the art that expresses our faith, and we have bands playing on Friday night and Saturday night of all kinds that interest all people. And we have an open mic night that actually shows we are listening to you We're not
You,
just doing our stuff for you to listen to. We want you to get up and show us your stuff so we can listen. That was our version of reinforcing the places without the bullet holes and saying, let's find the gaps. And although this, as the story goes, this church, which we called the Front Porch, because that's the third space, that's the place in between the home and the street where people can
yes, I'm
together, the Front
loving
Porch.
it. I'm loving all of this.
This, as the story goes, it didn't last for more than 5 years, and that was sad. And just we weren't able to make ends meet the way that we thought we could beyond that point. I still hear from people 15, 20 years later who said that that was a life-changing experience for them. That they didn't feel like they belonged anywhere. They didn't feel like the church was something that they could even consider. And that this was the thing that
Well,
changed the whole picture for them.
God used that for the season. He
Right.
he did obviously didn't mean for it to last forever because he had other things for you to do. But you obeyed and you planted those seeds and watered the ground at that time for those people that came through your threshold, sat on
Mm.
your front porch.
Right. And we feel that and we miss it, and we can get wistful and nostalgic about it, of course, but we can also see why that chapter happened in our lives when and where it did.
Sure. Because maybe God knows better.
Just maybe. Well,
Maybe
yeah.
he knows what he's doing.
Yeah. So belonging has been a big deal ever since then. And if we're not focused on hospitality, if we're not focused on belonging, we might as well hang it up. I mean, according to our own theology, we're already going to heaven, right? So what are we even doing if we're not using the resources we have, the time we have to open new doors that have been closed and to reach out to people who have been on the outside? And that really comes back to the question of Jewish and Gentile. I mean, Paul, of course, is sort of the poster boy for
Right.
this, of saying, you know what, I'm a Jewish man preaching a Jewish Messiah in a Jewish town, but maybe there's more. Maybe there are unreached people that Jesus had in mind when he incarnated and when he had his ministry and when he died and raised. And you can see, of course, the evidence of that as Jesus went around to not only Jewish communities, but Gentile communities. And when the way that he talked about the Samaritans, for instance, or the Syrophoenician woman, there was a moment there where we weren't sure what was going to happen with the Jewish. It's like, but don't you know I was only sent to the lost sheep of Israel? And when she says, yeah, but don't even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the table? And he's like, that is faith. Or the Roman centurion who believes that Jesus can heal even with a word from a distance. And Jesus is pointing out the faith that he sees in the outsider. And Paul picks up on this and says, you know what? Maybe we need to also, maybe it's time to take seriously the last clause of that Great Commission and the ends of the earth. Who are those
Yeah,
people? Who are those people?
that's
And
that
what are we here for if not to think of them?
right. I mean, we're on our way to heaven and God could just go ahead and take us,
Yeah, right. Yeah,
but he left us here. So we're supposed to be doing something here.
right, right. We
We're
have
here to
we
make
have our
heaven
commission.
crowded. We're here to make heaven
Here to
crowded.
make heaven crowded. That's right. We'll add another few stories to that condo skyscraper.
Right, right. Okay, so where do you think this passion for or this understanding for the need to belonging? Did you grow up in a family where you always knew that you belonged, or did you ever have a time in your life that you were on the outside looking in?
Mm, yes.
Okay.
That's I am so thankful to have had a childhood where I always knew I was loved, and it's a very privileged upbringing, having loving parents and a brother who I was, felt at home. But at the same time, when I was with peers, I always had friends, and I don't want to be, wallowing in self-pity of any kind, because it's not, it wouldn't be true. But I always felt like there was more, um, and my potential with the people around me, it wasn't quite connecting. Like I feel like I should have more friends than this, or I should be spending more time out there with these people or those people. And I wasn't getting there. And, and I often did, I had a lot of self-doubt about whether it's something about my personality. Do I ask too many questions in class? So I'm the nerd, or I'm too eager, or I'm not, you know, striking the right note with people. Uh, so there was always a disconnect between what I wanted socially and what I felt like I was capable of achieving. And it really did. I think it really did bother me. And I've had conversations with therapists since then about how I developed a sense of needing to earn love. With that disclaimer there and that preface there that I grew up with loving parents and a loving home. So this isn't a tragic story of any kind, but I can see how that disconnect in my childhood and in my youth turned me into an adult that was always trying to achieve something that would finally earn me the love that I'm longing for, or earn me the belonging that I'm longing for, right? So I feel like I've done a lot of growing in that area and recognizing God's unconditional love.
That's the thing. Yeah.
And that is the root of scripture, the root of Jesus' teaching. And it can take us an entire life to grasp that one supposedly simple concept.
Mm-hmm. Well, except for Jesus, I'm pretty sure everyone, no matter how stable or dysfunctional their family was, everybody has to come into a knowing of accepting themselves and accepting that God accepts you unconditionally with his love.
Right.
So, and with that, we are going to take a break and be right back with the fabulous Reverend Ryan Wiksell. See you in a minute. Hey there! Isn't my guest amazing? So glad you joined us today. In this world that often feels disconnected, building community and fostering belonging are essential. That's why I created this podcast, to bring inspiring people to you, to encourage you to create that sense of belonging and community, no matter where you are. If you're being blessed by my guest, and we have some more, like, subscribe, and share this podcast. You know who needs to hear this. Stay connected, stay true to yourself, and always remember, you belong. Now, back to our amazing guest. And we are back with the fabulous Ryan Wiksell. I've been practicing it.
You've been saying it right. Yeah, Wiksell is correct, yes. Yeah.
Wiksell. And if you've heard any of my episodes, you know I love to ask 3 questions. It tells me so much, and I learn so much. Also, the first question is, Ryan, what do you consider is your greatest accomplishment?
Well, that's a tough question. I feel like I'm in a job interview where they say, what's your biggest strength? The next, what's your biggest weakness, right? But it makes me feel a little bit better about my greatest accomplishment that it's shared. So I don't feel like I'm tripping out on my ego, right? But pretty easy answer to that question would be the writing of our book, The Last Seder of James. My father and I have teamed up on that. It was really his brainchild, because he got a doctorate in ministry degree 15 years ago or so. His doctorate is in Jewish studies. And so he did a very deep dive with Judaism, and especially as it interfaces with Christianity. So looking into the Jewish roots of the Christian faith, the Jewish foundations of the faith. And he did his dissertation specifically on Passover. So I've got a book over on my shelf there. I've got a copy of it. It's a 250-page or so research project on Passover, where he had already been in the habit of putting on Passover seders, Passover dinners, for Christians, for Messianic Jews, for nuns, people with no particular affiliation, and getting their feedback on that and understanding what sort of impact that experience has on people who do that, especially for the first time. And he just felt really strongly about how this is something that needs to be communicated more, especially to the Christian church, especially to those Gentile Christians who maybe are completely unaware of the Judaism of Jesus, of the Jewishness of the Christian faith, of the early Christians, and also more specifically how the Passover has created a framework for everything that we know of as Christianity today. And so your question was about biggest accomplishment. This has been a 10-year process or so of taking his teachings and distilling those, not trying to publish a 250-page research dissertation for public consumption, but rather, again, getting back to belonging and getting back to what really speaks to people. We thought, well, let's tell a story. Let's do what Jesus did. Jesus told parables. The Good Samaritan was not a real person. The prodigal son was not a real person. They were fictional characters that Jesus invented to tell a story, to make a larger point. So we imagine, and you asked me on a personal note, why James, Last Seder of James? Why not any number of people? Well, the James in the title here is James, the brother of Jesus. So his oldest brother, younger than Jesus, of course, but older than the others. And we did a little research and discovered that history tells us that James, who is also known as the Bishop of Jerusalem, he was a pillar of the faith, but that he was martyred on the eve of Passover in the year 62 by being thrown off the top of the temple wall and then stoned when he hit the ground. So that's a little graphic. Apologize for that. But that he was walked to the top of the temple and given an opportunity to renounce his faith in front of the gathered Passover throng, which we're talking hundreds of thousands of people. It's hard to even fathom. But that is the kind of crowd that was typical every year in Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. And they say, hey, in front of these hundreds of thousands of people, renounce Jesus, renounce your faith, or else. And naturally, he chose, or else. He chose to reaffirm his own faith, to reaffirm the messiahship of Jesus in front of that crowd. And then he was subsequently martyred. So with this history in mind, we decided, well, let's back up a little bit. What was that night like? What was the evening and the nighttime in prison before his martyrdom? What might have happened in this eve of Passover, this first evening of Passover? And what if the Apostle John came to visit him and brought a Passover Seder with him so that they could have this, they could observe this together in a dungeon on the last night of James's life? Part of the reason we imagine this is because it's worth assuming, worth presuming, I suppose, that John and James were not the best of friends during those early days of the church, that James was not a believer really in Jesus' messiahship during his ministry, because we have recorded that his family was not fully on board. Even his mother Mary was maybe a little bit skeptical, faithful, but not quite sure what to think during his actual ministry. And it's certainly not his brothers, and that they didn't really come to believe until.
Well, I mean, he's their brother.
I know. He's like, yeah, he's a good kid. In fact, he's a little too good, and we look bad in comparison.
Pressure
right?
on us.
Maybe a little resentful. Maybe shades of Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat, right? So some jealousy there probably. But they had a lot of trouble believing Jesus' message during his ministry, and didn't become believers until he was revealed to them in the resurrection. And then, of course, we see not only James, but the Epistle of Jude, that was another brother of Jesus. So there's plenty of evidence that they came around. But that John, during Jesus' ministry, was the beloved disciple, right? He was more or less Jesus' favorite disciple and had this kind of teacher's pet status, right? And we see that evidenced at the cross when Jesus is dying and he pledges his mother's care not to his next of kin, which would be his brother, but to his favorite disciple, John. So how must James have felt about that? And
was James there? Was James
I don't think he would have been present. So he also would have had to believe the testimony that, of course, you could have had the risen Jesus also clarifying to him, saying, hey, James, yes, I'm risen. It's me. I'm the Messiah. I'm the Son of God. And also, yes, I actually did ask John to take care of mother. But To add insult to injury, though, history tells us that John moved to Ephesus, that the majority of his ministry took place in Ephesus in Asia Minor, which would have been a full week's trip by boat from Jerusalem, and that Mary would have gone with it. And there's evidence of that, even that Mary, there is a shrine to Mary, the mother of Jesus, at Ephesus that you can visit to this day.
Hmm.
That's evidence that she would have lived out her days, not in Israel or anywhere near it, but the distant megacity of Ephesus. So there's some bad blood, there's some resentment and whatnot. And we kind of use that in the beginning of the story to say John realizes that this may be the last night of James's life. And we need to do our best to reconcile. And so his way of doing that is to bring a Passover Seder. Let us enjoy Passover together. Let's talk about what's divided us. And let's talk about our stories. Let's talk about how John had experiences with Jesus during his ministry that James would have known nothing about, especially before the Gospels were written, because this is a time where you could argue that there maybe was one Gospel written, but not others. But then John, let me share what it was like at the Last Supper. Let me share what it was like walking with Jesus and ministering to Jesus. And then James can share what it was like growing up with Jesus, experiences that John never had, and how they may have been friends with their cousin, John the Baptist, who was the same age as Jesus and can tell stories from Jesus' childhood that would have been new to John. So as their hearts open to each other, and as they warm, and as they start to experience this reconciliation, they can also share these stories that neither of them would ever have heard. And then each step, which you know as well as anybody, if not better, Dea. Is it Dea? Am I pronouncing that right? How detailed the Passover Seder is, and that each detail is rich with meaning in referring to the Exodus from Egypt and into the whole story of Israel, and then how that's mapped onto the incarnation and the sacrifice of Jesus himself as the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, right?
Mm-hmm. 4 cups.
And the four cups of the Passover, and with Jesus taking the third cup and saying, "This is my blood," taking the matzah, right, the unleavened bread, and saying, "This is my body broken for you." And even at the end where he says, "I will not drink this cup again until we are together in the kingdom." And he's referring to the fourth cup.
Right.
And so we have this, the cover of the book is of a spilled chalice with the wine spilling. And that's an image of the spilled blood of Jesus. But also this is something, spoiler alert, this is something that happens in the story, is where James and John are together about to drink the fourth cup, but then the guard barges in and says it's time. Knocks the cup over, spills the blood, spills the wine on the floor. And it's just another symbol of how the fourth cup is not drunk, is not received, because it's being saved for the future kingdom.
Love it.
And there's also I'll give your listeners a little bit of a hint. It's also suggested that this is the Holy Grail.
So, there it is. There it is.
That John's been keeping it. He brings it with him to Jerusalem to give back to James, to keep it in Jesus' biological family. And so this is the cup that they use to share a Seder together.
Wow, fascinating. Yes.
So we had fun with it. It's been quite a journey.
And does your family celebrate a Messianic Passover?
Yeah, every year. In fact, and my parents still put one on for other churches and their congregation that they belong to is a Messianic. It's sort of a blended Messianic Jewish and Gentile blended together. And they Passover Seder is a very big event in their community.
Well, of course, that's where your dad would go.
Naturally.
Yes. Wonderful. Wow. And where should someone go to get a copy? It is released, right?
It is. It's out, and it's
Amazon?
You can go to ourfatherabraham.com. It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Noble. If you go to their websites,
wherever books are sold.
But we'd love it if you just go to our website, ourfatherabraham.com.
Our Father Abraham.
So it's just all one word. .com, and there's buttons right there at the top of the homepage that'll take you to Amazon or take you to Barnes and Noble.
Perfect.
And
excellent. Oh wow, Well, that all of that, I mean, that's enough. But we do have two more questions.
Okay, all right. We'll do our
What
best.
makes you feel like you belong?
What makes me feel like I belong? I'm not sure that I'm a very good listener. So I admire people who are really good at listening, and you seem to be one of those people, uh, who who really are. You can tell it's not just a social convention.
Mhm.
They're not just being polite, but when people lean in and really seem to be open to changing their perspective on life because of what you're sharing, because of your story.
Mhm.
And maybe this is an over simple answer to your question, but just knowing that I matter in someone else's day and in that moment, and that they are open to changing and being impacted by what I have to say in that moment makes me feel like I belong.
And a lot of people use a lot of answers for this, but I would doubt there's any one person that wouldn't agree with that.
Hmm.
When you feel like someone's listening to you,
Yeah,
that makes you feel seen and heard
yeah,
and that you matter. And those are the three things that people need to feel like they belong. So listening, yeah, there are at least five ways that people listen. And one way is just for information, like you listen to a sermon and you're taking notes, or a lecture, or listen
yeah,
to directions somebody's telling you how to get somewhere. And that's not going to make anybody feel like they belong. Another way is critical listening, where you're trying to analyze the information you're getting because you have a decision to make. And
yeah.
another way is listening to help somebody because you're a fixer and you want to know where the problem is and I'm going to fix it. Another way is with empathy, where you're actually reflecting on what they're saying. And that's the one that one. And then the fifth one of being an active listener, where you're actually engaged with the person. Those two are the ones that are very impactful listening. So when we say we're listening, are we listening for one of the more impactful ways? Or are we listening while we're trying to figure out what our response is going to be?
Right. And I can be guilty of that. I know that I can. But I like to think that the reason why we did church the way we did, especially in our church plant in Springfield, was based in that. And that we had an open mic night, every Saturday night. What was it? Anyway, we had open mic nights where I think people really felt listened to by that. I think it was, we are saying, you brought your guitar, you brought your instrument, you brought your poem, you brought your story, whatever it is, and we want to invite you up front, and we're all going to listen to you. And it's such a, I don't know, disarming experience, I think, in the church, that people expect they show up in church, and my job is going to be to listen to whatever they have to say the whole time. And even the sermons were conversational, where we'd ask questions and we'd have kind of a back and forth in the sermon, and then there was prayer time where we'd all talk amongst ourselves at the whatever table we're sitting at. And so there's so much interaction and so much two-way dialogue,
Mm-hmm.
that it's sad to me that people would have so little expectation of being listened to in a church setting, that they would assume it's one directional, because I think that's what we have led people to assume. That is the expectation we've
Totally. And I think it was during the recording part where we talked about not having the attitude of how can we make us be where people want to be here,
had.
instead of what is it people need that we can create for them. How instead of saying what do we need to do to make them want to be here, ask how do we need to be for them to feel like they belong.
Right, exactly
Those
right.
are two totally different perspectives on church growth
Yeah.
that's needed.
What is it that people choose to do on their own? Let's learn from that. And
Right.
that really is that empathy and that active listening that you're talking about is
Hmm.
not how can we tweak ourselves so that people might start to take an interest in us, but what are people already taking an interest in doing? What are people doing with their Wednesday evenings and Thursday evenings and Friday evenings? And what do people seek out on their own? And what intersection is there between us and that? Do we have anything in common with these things? And the reality is, yes, we do, because people seek out relationship.
Right.
People seek out friendship, people seek out community on their own. And if we have that to offer, let's just let's just put ourselves in that place and stop expecting people to step out on a limb to come and join our favorite thing.
It should not be hard work for someone to join a church.
Right?
It should be a slide into church.
Absolutely.
Okay, moving right along. This is so good. The third question is, and I love this because everybody brings something different, and I learned so much. But what is, or one of the one you want to choose today, your favorite quote?
Yeah, that is going to be different, a little different every day. But you reminded me that I filled out a form and told you my favorite quote, and that I'm going to stick with that because it's still right at the front for me. And that is that you cannot become what you already are. And I heard
Please
that.
expound.
Oh, yeah, I
Yes.
will. I will. I heard that spoken by a comedian named Pete Holmes, who's also, I consider him one of my favorite philosophers as well. He is extremely well read and deep and thoughtful. And I feel like he's quoting somebody else with that. I'd have to look it up. But you cannot become what you already are. I have only gotten more and more committed to this idea the more I've preached and the more that I've led in church settings here, because I am concerned that we are obsessed with becoming something else. And I am concerned that the church has been at the forefront of teaching people that what you are is bad and that God needs you to become something good instead. And we can get into all kinds of theological debates about original sin and total depravity and all of that. And I don't want to do that. But I have become more and more convinced that the very root and the very core of all of theology is that we were created in God's image. And I don't know any Christian that would disagree with that. That's such basic theology. And yet I don't think it occupies the central place of our theology the way that it always ought to. I think sometimes we say it almost as a disclaimer that we say, well, yes, I know we were created in God's image, but, and then we go into all of the original sin stuff. And I've become aware that, I don't want to speak for them, but that Eastern Christianity, whether it's Coptic or Syriac or Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox Christianity, tends to approach sin not through the lens of judgment and wrongdoing, but through a lens of illness. So it's not a crime that needs to be punished so much as it is an illness that needs to be healed. It is a condition, that the human condition is a condition of rebellion, a condition of abandonment, of rejection, of fill in the blank. But that conditions don't need to be punished. Conditions need to be healed. And so that Jesus' work on the cross is itself a healing work. That it is approaching our condition and saying, here's the balm of Gilead, right? A balm is a therapeutic. It's healing.
Mm-hmm.
So a condition, the reason why we can treat a condition as something that needs to be healed is because we know what we were before that condition. We know what to do about a heart condition because we know what a heart is supposed to be like before that condition. And we know how to treat the flu or a headache or whatever because it's like, well, this is not how my head is supposed to feel. If I drink more water or take this pill or whatever, then I can return my head to the way it was before this condition. My head is not essentially a headache. Thank goodness. So when I have a headache and I'm trying to heal that headache, I'm not saying I'm trying to make my head into something else. I'm not trying to become something. I am trying to return to the natural state, return to the original state, to what it was created to feel like, what it was created to be.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hoping in my own journey and in the journey that I'm leading people on, to say that salvation is not transformation. Salvation is a remembering and a reclaiming of
Of
what
how
has
God
been.
meant for us to be.
Exactly. And we can use the word transform, and that's fine. I don't disagree with that. But only insofar as we recognize that we are unveiling a truth that's already there. We're not creating something new. We're not abandoning something that we truly are, but we are rediscovering who we truly are in Christ because we are created in God's image. So you cannot become what you already are, but you can forget what you are and we all have. And we are on a journey of remembering who that is and rediscovering and re-becoming who we already are.
That's worth remunerating on. What is it? Ruminating on. No, I can't think of the word.
There's so many good RE words that could fit in that sentence that I don't even know where to start. But you're right. I hope that can form the foundation
Yeah.
of everything about our spiritual journey.
Well, I'm going to chew my cud on that. That's the word I'm trying to find. Before we close, because we
Yes.
did get to our 3 questions, do you have any parting words for our listeners?
Oh man. On top of that, I
I
don't
know
know. I
that's
feel
pretty
like I was
good
just
ending.
gonna. I
That's
mean,
a pretty good ending.
I know
Listen,
it did feel like it.
rewind and listen to what we just said.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously you and I would not have met if it wasn't for this writing journey and for this book that we've written. And um, if the kind of the core theme here is about rediscovering what has been true all along, what has been there all along, then it is my Father's hope and it's my hope that this base note of Judaism that has been drowned out by a lot of, let's be honest, by a lot of anti-Semitism
Mm-hmm.
and by a lot of rah-rah Gentile Christianity, that base note could be rediscovered. And maybe sometimes that means quieting some of the other voices, quieting some of the chaos, and quieting some of the capitalist control freak power mongering. I'm not anti-capitalism, but boy, it doesn't always mix well with faith, does it? Uh, Quieting ourselves to the extent where we can rediscover that base note that reverberated so loudly in Jesus' own heart and that formed
Mm-hmm.
so much of his core identity and informed everything that he did and said. How could we not become students of that? How could we be followers of Jesus and not be students of the Judaism that drove him and the Judaism that he loved and desired to reclaim from, let's call it the capitalism of the Pharisees, right? Of all of this.
Spoiler alert, Jesus was Jewish.
Jesus was Jewish. And the Last Supper was a Jewish Seder. It was a Passover Seder. And
Yes.
yeah, so
Communion came from a Jewish tradition.
it was. And we have this tiny little thumbnail of Passover, don't we? In our
Right.
in the cup
Little
and in the
blip.
bread that we and but there's millions of bits of richness that come out of just that little wafer and that little cup that we receive.
Right.
And if we're going to be followers of Jesus and worshipers of Jesus, why not follow that path? Why not go down
Why
that
not?
road?
Exactly. Well, to my amazing guests, thank you, Ryan, and to our listeners, belongers. Stay connected, stay true to yourself, and always remember you belong. This is Dea Irby with Here Where You Belong podcast. Signing off. Bye now.
Thanks for tuning in to Hear Where You Belong. We hope today's episode has inspired you to embrace the beauty of belonging in your own life. Remember, no matter where you are or where you're headed, you have a place where you truly belong. Join us again next time for more insightful conversations and heartwarming stories. Until then, stay connected, stay true to yourself, and always remember that you belong.